What do you say, everybody? Welcome to Monday Quarterback here on WNSP. We do this Mondays noon to 1, where we talk about the Alabama game with Jake Coker, who's on assignment today. He'll be back next Monday. I'm Mick Gillispie, but thanks for hanging out and talking football with us, mostly Alabama football. Of course, the host of the Bama Tailgate show with Jake, and we love to get together with you guys each week and talk Alabama. And what a game it was for the Crimson Tide, and so much to get into after Alabama's game on Saturday. The rebound from the loss to Vanderbilt, and it really wasn't a comfortable win for Alabama. They had a 14-0 lead, as you remember, and then all of a sudden, just kind of a safety for two. South Carolina scored a touchdown. Milroe took a safety. Then, right at the end of the half, Bama trying to move the ball downfield through an interception. They kick a field goal, then they score a touchdown. And all of a sudden, it was a 19-14 lead for South Carolina. But Bama with 13 points in the fourth quarter. They get a couple of touchdowns, and they win the ball game 27-25. There's so much to get into in this game. And I guess what we'll do is we'll start with the offensive side of the football, and we'll talk a little defense and special teams, and then look around the SEC, because college football has definitely changed. I mean, you're talking about NIL and transfer portal. So you don't have to be the best at going out and convincing someone to go play somewhere. You don't have to worry about, if you're Texas, the money that you spend. I mean, they have what we're hearing is a pretty unlimited budget, right? And they're taking advantage of that. And, in building a roster of guys that are not only, players that they recruit, but also guys that they go out and buy. Ohio State's done that as well. And Alabama has too. I mean, to an extent, that's kind of how the game's played right now. But it really does take teams like South Carolina, you look at it and you go, they're 3-3, they're 1-3 in the conference, but they're not a bad team. And it's the same thing with Vandy, who Alabama lost to last week. Maybe Bama didn't take Vanderbilt seriously, and I really felt like Bama was on a hangover after beating Georgia. But looking back now and watching Vandy and the way that they played in Lexington against South Carolina, I kind of feel like, this is a good team. And that you can't really judge what the SEC was a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. It's just different now. And what makes it different is that there's a lot more parity, and it almost feels like the NFL. And I feel like that they've kind of set things up like that with the fact that players are getting paid now, and it's not amateur athletics anymore. I mean, this is it's a business. So, you look at the matchup and you're going, 27-25, you barely win. You could have lost to South Carolina, but then you're going, hey, their guys are paid too. They have good coaches too. They have good facilities too. And this Gamecocks team is so Jekyll and Hyde. I mean, they're really one of the toughest teams to handicap, because they'll have a terrible performance one week and then they'll come back and almost beat Alabama the next, So, and that's what happened. I mean, they got pretty much dominated by Ole Miss. And then, they should have beaten Alabama. I mean, really could have. But Jalen Milroe, not one of his better games at quarterback. 16-23, 209 yards passing. He had 2 interceptions. Both of them I didn't think were good interceptions. One was in the end zone. And, on the other side of the field, you got Ryan Williams in single coverage. Instead, he tried to slip it in there to Jeremy Bernard, who actually had his best game as a member of Alabama's football team. But Milroe was under distress. The line wasn't great, but Milroe wasn't great either. South Carolina was kind of just sending constant pressure in his face. And Alabama, I thought they tried more to establish a run game. And when you consider Milroe running the football, Bama ended up carrying the ball 38 times and getting 104 yards, but nobody really had that breakout performance. And we've kind of waited on Bama's 2 running backs, Jam Miller and Jalen Milroe, Jam Miller and Justice Haynes, to be those breakout guys, but they just haven't been able to do that. And I kind of feel like when I look at them, I'm like, at some point you would have thought that going into the season anyway, I figured that the offensive line would have been the strength of this football team. I really did. And it just hasn't played out that way this year. And it could be, look, injuries obviously play a part of that. We watched Caden Proctor, who was injured at the beginning of the season before the season even started. He hurt himself in warmups. Remember that? But then he's back. Jaden Roberts has been, I guess, dealing with injuries. Parker Brailsford's done a great job snapping the ball for the most part this year. He's been one of the real bright spots on this offense. And same thing, Tyler Booker has been nothing but consistent for Alabama. But it's just the offensive line. Pritchett has looked good at times, and he's missed some blocks at times. I mean, I'm just waiting for this offensive line to take control of games and do some damage. And they really they've, like I said, they've been inconsistent. I think that's been one of the issues for Alabama is that for them to win these games, you want to stop the run on defense and you want to be able to run the ball on offense. But having Milroe in there, Milroe was bottled up again. I mean, his longest run was 27 yards and he did score 2 touchdowns and on the ground. And I think that's still, to me, what makes him so dangerous. And you get into the red zone, and Alabama has done a great job of getting into the end zone, and it's because of Milroe's ability to run. So you can, Haynes got a touchdown in the game running, Milroe got 2, and then Bernard caught 1, right? So that accounts for your 4 touchdowns. In the red zone, they're really good running the ball, and I think it's because of Milroe. I mean, it's so hard to contain him. The minute that you think he's handing the ball off, he's running it. But nothing about the offense felt like they were dominant at the line of scrimmage, and I feel like that was one of the biggest issues in this game for the Crimson Tide was that at the offensive line, and I'm not blaming this on just the offensive line. Could be backs not blocking, could be Milroe not picking up blitzes, but whatever the deal was, they were beaten at the line of scrimmage. And I felt like that's why Alabama struggled. They still won the football game. And when you look at the offensive stats in that game on Saturday, the team comparisons, South Carolina really won every significant stat, right? But they didn't win the game. And I think that's important. I mean, you do need to value how important it is to win. I mean, that's what you're there to do. But South Carolina had more first downs than Bama, 23-20. They were better third downs, 7 of 15. I know 5 came on one drive. Bama was 5 of 11. So, I mean, I guess about the same. Fourth downs, Bama finally got a fourth down stop. The Gamecocks were 1 of 2. Bama was 1 of 1. But, kind of getting to those stats that matter. Total yards, Gamecocks outgained Alabama 374-313. Passing yards, 242-209. Rushing yards, 132-104. So, there you go. And then Bama had more penalties than South Carolina. And that's something else we can kind of get into when I'm talking about the defensive side of the football. But because some of the penalties on defense are the reasons why Alabama lost. But the stat that matters the most is turnovers. South Carolina turned the ball over 4 times. Bama turned it over twice. That includes 3 fumbles for the Gamecocks. And 1 came when it looked like they were about to take charge of the game. Like they were kind of picking up some steam, and they got the ball back from Alabama, and it felt like they had the lead. They were going to do something with it, and then they were stopped. And then from that point on, it was them trying to catch up. Bama took advantage of that, got the lead back, and then, at the end of the game. Now, there was a couple of things that happened late in the game that are worth talking about. And one of those things is the touchdown that Bernard scored. If Bernard would have fell down instead of scoring the touchdown, Bama could have ran the clock out and they would have won the game. They would have won it right there. By him scoring, that kept the game going. South Carolina got the ball back. They scored. And then the onside kick, which I guess we could talk special teams here in this spot before we go to our first break. But the onside kick was awful. And I've had people ask me, why do we have three linebackers out there on the hands team. What are we doing in this spot? It felt like watching that it was a perfect kick, first off. I mean, you couldn't have onside kicked the ball better. But at the same time, it was like, hey, it looked like Keystone Cops. Balls bouncing over everybody's hand. Nobody knows what to do with it. They recover in Alabama because of that. Was lucky that they won the football game because all South Carolina needed was a field goal. But they were out of timeouts, they didn't take care of the opportunity that they had. Bama made some big plays on defense and turned it away. But it turned out to be an exciting game. It didn't go down the way that I think a lot of us were hoping. Bama was like a 22-point favorite. And after losing to South Carolina, you figured that they would jump back in and take control, but they didn't. Now, on the other hand, you look at the way that the team in 2015 won, and this is something that Jake actually said to me. We lost to Ole Miss. The next game, we beat Arkansas 14-13. And that team went on to win a national championship. So you got to look at it in those terms as well. That when you go out there and suit up and you're Alabama, everybody's trying to basically give you their best shot. And do you think that Auburn would like to have a win in some of those games that they lost this year, some of the close games that they've had? Yeah, I think they would. So at the end of the day, the goal is to have one more point than the other team. And so as Kalen DeBoer and Kane Womack and Nick Sheridan and this coaching staff go through this for the first time, deal with trying to handle the expectations that we have at Alabama and inherit this dynasty, which I guess in college football now it'd be really hard to have a dynasty just because of the transfer portal and the NIL and the parity across the game, but very inflated expectations. They did bounce back again, after losing to Vandy and pick up a win. And I think that's important. I think that's something that they should be credited for. And I think that's the most important thing you do each and every week. We're going to talk more about that Tennessee matchup coming up. More of Monday Quarterback here on WNSP right after this. Welcome back to Monday Quarterback here on WNSP in Mobile, the sound of Mobile. And we appreciate all you guys for hanging out. Jake Coker on assignment. I'm Mick Gillispie. Great to talk Alabama football with you after the Tide with a 27-25 win. Still the Tide top 10 in the country with the victory. We're going to talk about the defense a little bit and kind of get into that some in this segment after the game against South Carolina. But before we really get into the defense, I got to throw a shout out to James Burnham, the Alabama punter. What a great day Burnham had kicking the football for Alabama. And I think that's an area where, if you don't have a great punter, you can kind of struggle and you don't realize like, hey, you know what? It's that important. But he had 3 punts and the average was 59 yards. The long was 59 yards. The average was 49.7. And those were game changers to me. I mean, just the way that he was able to flip the field, not only long punts, but punts that, that get up there high and give the coverage team a chance to get down there. And then there was the one where he was roughed and Bama got the ball back. He's been a really big part of this Alabama team, just his ability to punt the ball and change field position. And, he's a person that has been a big contributor to this team. So we talked about the fail on the onside kick, but I'll tell you what, he's been, right up there with J.K. Scott, the former Alabama punter, as a real weapon for this team. So Burnham, someone that we definitely needed to throw a shout out to. But let's talk about the defense for a little bit. I thought the defense was okay. The Kane Womack has taken some heat from Alabama fans, obviously allowing 374 yards. Some, I'd say the last half against Georgia And then the Vanderbilt game, they never really got, I thought they didn't really get enough stops. I mean, they were 12 of 16 on third down. And I mean, that to me is an area where you've got to do better. And then this game against South Carolina, you needed an interception at the end of the game to win. It came down to that. They did, but they could have used the stop on the touchdown that South Carolina got. Maybe a little bit more pressure. LT Overton's been in the backfield a ton for Alabama. And he's been their best, I'd say, defensive weapon on the line of scrimmage. Tim Smith had a good game as well, but Overton is back there a lot. He's just got to finish. And it feels like the quarterback or the running back's like he's disrupting the play, but he's not finishing the play. And I think that's an area where Alabama could certainly do a lot better. The other thing for Alabama, Damani Jackson left the game injured, wasn't sure if he was going to be back or not. And then he eventually came back and was made the game-winning interception. So the secondary for the Tide is definitely depleted. I mean, they didn't have Jaleel Hurley was the only guy that came back last year from the secondary after the Nick Saban retired. And then Tavarius Robinson went to Georgia. You lost Caleb Downs and you lost Kite and you lost Pope, and you start seeing all these guys go in different places. And when the dust settled, there really wasn't anybody there. So you got Jackson transferred from USC, and then you had Brown and Mbakwe and Mincy, who were 4- and 5-star recruits that came in and have done a nice job. I mean, don't get me wrong, but don't have any experience. And so, for Alabama in that area, it's been, hey, let's get these young guys up to speed as quick as possible. And then hope that, that we can get enough of a pass rush where they're not left out on an island. Now, safety spot has been, well, honestly, I mean, they've got two of their best players back there, and Keon Sabb, and then, of course, Malachi Moore. It was good to see Moore back. We talked a lot about him last week and the way that he acted in the Vanderbilt game. He had one of the biggest plays in the game to me on the interception at the end of the game. Jackson caught the ball, and I couldn't tell if his momentum carried him into the end zone or if he just took the ball into the end zone. And I know Kalen DeBoer talked about it after the game, and basically it sounded like he felt like Jackson should have taken a knee. Moore told him to run out of the end zone. I agree with that. And part of it is just the officiating. The last thing I want is Bama to give up 2 points there, because all of a sudden the officials are like, well, you know what? That was him. He ran into the end zone and took a knee. It should be a safety. When he ran it out, as soon as he got around players, he slid down and the game was over. So, you worry, well, somebody could come up and strip the ball and then something like, whatever. But they ran the clock out. They won the game. And it was Moore that was like, go get, run this out of here. I thought that was the right move. And I thought that was a big moment in the game. But Keon Sabb ended up with 12 tackles, 7 solos in the game. So he had another really nice game for Alabama. But I still feel like this defense has a long way to go. The penalty on Campbell is running back there, gets in the quarterback's face, and they call, like he brushes the guy's helmet, and it's like a penalty. I'm getting sick of those penalties. There's a difference between roughing the passer and just playing football. It feels like some of those penalties come at times where they extend drives, and you almost wonder, are these guys officiating for just trying to make the right call, or are they officiating to make it more interesting on TV? Because both the last 2 games when it's happened, it's felt like Alabama was right on the verge of pulling away, and then all of a sudden they get the ball back and they go down and score, and it kind of changes the momentum of the contest. So that's something that I thought about too. When we come back, we'll talk about the polls. Alabama unchanged in the polls, but some shakeup in the top 25 after the action around college football yesterday. We'll get into that and more right here on Monday Quarterback, hanging out with you on WNSP. I'm Mick Gillispie. Don't go anywhere. More of the show right after this. Welcome back to Monday Quarterback. Mick Gillispie, Jake Coker on assignment, talking Alabama as the Crimson Tide took care of business. They won the football game against South Carolina. It wasn't easy, but a win, 27-25. And a weekend where we realized that the SEC has a ton of parity. And we've always said that about the conference, right? Auburn fans, you guys didn't lose this week because you didn't play. So you'll be back at it again this coming Saturday. But let's take a look at the action around the SEC. And let me start by telling you that Texas, after beating up on Oklahoma, remains number one in both the AP and the coaches poll. Oregon up to number two after winning by a point over Ohio State. And then Penn State up to number three. How about that? They had to come from behind overtime win against USC. Coaches poll has Georgia at 4, Ohio State 5. AP has Ohio State 4 and Georgia 5. Miami 6 in both polls at 6-0. Bama 7 in both polls, unchanged. LSU, after their win over Ole Miss in overtime, 5-1 now, starting to find some momentum with Brian Kelly. They're up to number 8. I know there's a lot of LSU fans in the area. Then you got Clemson at number 9 and Tennessee at number 10 in the coaches poll. And you got Iowa State at number 9 and Clemson at number 10, Tennessee at number 11 in the AP. So Tennessee slides 3 spots despite beating Florida. That surprises me. In the AP poll, coaches poll dropped the Vols down 1. And I guess, they're 5-1. They lost at Arkansas. That's always a tough place to play. They didn't look good against Florida's defense. I think they're having some issues at the line of scrimmage. And then Alabama plays them coming up this Saturday, 2:30 in Knoxville. That's going to be a battle in the SEC. But I'll tell you what, when you look at the conference right now, you really do have to admit that this is probably the most parity that I can ever remember in the SEC. And you figure that with all the money that these schools are getting, even Vanderbilt having a good football team is something that, we haven't seen since Franklin was there. But when James Franklin was there, Tennessee was not good. So, they're both in the state of Tennessee. And, it just kind of felt like, well, if there was going to be a time to be the Vanderbilt coach, it'd be a time when the Volunteers weren't any good. But Texas beat Oklahoma 34-3, and they're 6-0, and they rolled. Quinn Ewers was back at quarterback, so Arch Manning did a good job of stepping in, but Ewers back in, and Texas was just too much for Oklahoma. And Oklahoma is now 1-2 in the conference. I'll tell you what, that's a job to keep an eye on. They were ranked in the top 20. And obviously, after losing to Texas, losing some momentum as well and losing to their arch rivals. Now, Georgia beat Mississippi State 41-31. And that is an eye-opening game for Georgia as they'll take on Texas here coming up. Talked about Bama. Tennessee won in overtime against Florida. You had LSU beating Ole Miss in overtime. You had Missouri pounding Massachusetts, UMass 45-3, and then Vanderbilt beat Kentucky as a big underdog 20-13. So the Commodores now 4-2 and 2-1 in the SEC. The win over Alabama, picking up some steam. They should have beat Missouri. It's such an interesting year when you look at what's really the parity in the conference. And when there were years where Nick Saban could line up Alabama against certain teams and it was going to be, hey, you're going to blow these guys out. It's just the way that it's going to match up today. Alabama was going to have better talent at every position. They were going to be coached well. They were going to be motivated. There was something special about Nick Saban. It's why he's the best ever. Now it really feels like even the teams that have struggled, like Auburn. I mean, it would not surprise me though if Auburn didn't jump up and get a big win over one of these other teams. It's I'm seeing it all across college football. And I think that a big part of this is the NIL and the transfer portal. You know, the guys that you would have for depth, they're going to transfer out if they're not playing. And so, you know, that's something that coaches have to deal with. And then on top of it, you know, if you don't have an NIL game, you don't have the money, that these guys are going to go somewhere that does. And so, or maybe you pay more, like you saw with Tennessee, for, you know, like Nico, their quarterback. You know, I think it was like somebody said it was like $3 or $5 million. You know, and now all of a sudden that doesn't seem like it's that big of a payout, but you know, but at the time it was a couple years ago, and you can build your program around having a superstar quarterback like that. So the world of college football is certainly different right now, and it's going to continue to change. It'll be based on NIL money until someone steps in and puts some guidelines on this thing. And I think a lot of people would like to see Nick Saban get off of the game day show and be the guy to do that. By Sticks Tractor and Tree Service over in Robertsdale. I got to tell you, Hunter and the guys are there to help you, whether it's land clearing, excavating, mulching, tractor work, demolition, site prep, all that stuff. We had an issue at my house, a water oak tree built right in the middle of the deck. And for years, it just, instead of kind of looking at this thing, had a split in it, it's pretty big, like 70 feet, just kind of let it go. And any storm would have knocked this thing down, and it would have came right through the house. And I always had a bad feeling about this particular tree. And, you know, we live pretty close to the bay. And, you know, after Sally, you know, you wonder what these guys came out, they brought their, you know, their big green machine, whatever this thing is, they hook it up to the tree, take it out. Everything, you know, no trees fell on my roof, anything like that. And the tree was actually hollow in the middle, and it would have eventually fallen on my house. So they did a great job. And like I said, Hunter and those guys at Sticks Tractor and Tree Service. And if you got some work with trees that, you know, it can be expensive. They have a day rate, you know, kind of a one price for all the trees you want out. They'll do individual jobs, and they're honest to do a good job, and they're not going to cost you too much. So Sticks Tractor and Tree Service, appreciate them for being part of what we're doing here. All right, Alabama and Tennessee play this Saturday in Neyland Stadium, Knoxville, Tennessee. This is one of those games that you watch college football for. And I know Alabama has absolutely dominated this series, but that was with Nick Saban. So this is Kalen DeBoer's first coaching job, I guess, at Alabama against a rival. And these are the games that you get graded on at Alabama. This game, LSU and Auburn. And the team has not been playing great. Bama has dominated the series. They won 16-17, but last time they were in Neyland, remember, with Bryce Young, they lost the football game, and it was really one of the most disappointing games of really I can remember in a long time. And I think it was just because I felt like Alabama had the team to beat Tennessee. There was some really awful officiating in that game that I thought played into it. But Bama's defense just I can still see Jalen Hyatt scoring touchdowns. It was like they just couldn't stop him. You know, Tennessee's going to try to run the ball, and then they're going to try to throw it over you. And when that offense is clicking, it is really, really tough to stop. But both of these teams have kind of been a little disappointing lately. I mean, think about Alabama, how great their defense was in the first half against Georgia. They've given up 63 points in the last 10 quarters. Think about that. 63 points in the last 10 quarters for Alabama after the first half against Georgia. That is a lot of points and a lot of yards there as well. But on the other side of things, Josh Heupel, the offensive genius behind Tennessee's Vols, has struggled as well. You know, this is a team that when they're humming, they're going to score a lot of points. And they were, I mean, just blowing teams out in the non-conference. They had, you know, games where they scored 50 points against their opponents this year. But in the conference games, they haven't scored that much. 25 or fewer points in 3 straight games. They have failed to reach 20-point mark in regulation the last 2. And then, the game against Florida when Graham Mertz was in at quarterback, the Gators were up 10-zip. It wasn't until he got injured that Tennessee was able to kind of take control of that game. And when you look at Tennessee's offense, they've had Squirrel White, who we remember from last year, made that incredible catch at Bryant-Denny Stadium. And, last year, Tennessee had a 20-7 lead at the half. Alabama came storming back to win that ball game. And then Dylan Sampson, their running back, who is exceptional as well. But those 2 guys have made a lot of plays. And then Nico, their quarterback. But their offensive line hasn't been great. They have averaged just 179 yards in their 3 conference games and 1 touchdown and 10 sacks passing for Nico. So you factor that in, and I think that's why the spread that came out has Alabama as a slight favorite over Tennessee. And that to me was kind of surprising, being on the road after losing to Vanderbilt last time out. But, right now the spread is Bama a 2-point favorite on the road. And I don't know. I mean, if you go down to Biloxi and you put your money on this game, and it feels like you take the home dog in this, especially the way that Alabama has struggled on defense, giving up so many points. But this is going to be who can get right. And Kalen DeBoer talked about the game against South Carolina, all the things that Alabama did to win the game. He's a positive guy, and I love that about Kalen DeBoer and what he brings to the table. And I don't think as Alabama fans we should ever not appreciate what a win is. But there's been a lot of times in the last 3 games where Bama could easily be 0-3. It could have lost to Georgia. They blew that lead and were trailing late. They lost to Vandy, and they easily could have lost to South Carolina after the onside kick. So they've got to get some things right as we head into this game against Tennessee. All right, final segment of Monday Quarterback here on WNSP right after this, and we'll do it for you as we talk Alabama and the SEC. Let's take a look at what's going on around the rest of the SEC, including Auburn, right after this. Final segment of Monday Quarterback. Mick Gillispie, Jake Coker on assignment as we talk Alabama every Monday from noon to 1 right here on WNSP, the sound of Mobile. And it's great to have all of you guys hanging out with us as always. And don't forget, look, couple things. The Bama Tailgate Show. Jake and I will be this week at Coastal in Orange Beach. And we record the show that you hear across the state of Alabama, previewing Alabama football every Saturday, Fridays. We do it when Bama's at home from Tuscaloosa, and when Bama's on the road, a lot of times we're down at the Floor Bama. So the same people that own the Floor Bama own Coastal, and we will be there from 1 to 4 on Friday recording the show. So if you're in the area, swing by and see us. It's been really fun to get to know a lot of you guys who have come by and checked out the show. And hey, it's a great excuse to come hang and have some great food. It's right there in Orange Beach when you go by the water tower, and it's a fantastic restaurant, really great food. And then you can listen to the show right here on WNSP 9 to 11 every Saturday, and we appreciate all you guys for doing that as well. All right, so Bama plays Tennessee. We've previewed that. It's a big game for both of those teams. It's a really decider. I think the loser likely out of the college football playoff picture. Tennessee, high expectations. Alabama, high expectations. Both of them with really losses that you would have never seen coming. Tennessee losing at Arkansas, probably less of an upset than Alabama losing to Vandy a couple weeks ago. But for the Crimson Tide, a couple of tough losses in the Volunteer State. The last 2 games they've played there. We'll see if that trend continues. Number 11, Tennessee hosting number 7, Alabama, 2:30 on Saturday. Now, other games in the conference, Tigers versus Tigers. Auburn against Missouri, number 19, Missouri. Missouri was in the top 10. They almost lost to Vandy. I don't know that win that they had over Vandy should be overlooked now as Vanderbilt's beat Alabama and Kentucky. We'll see. The schedule gets tougher for the Commodores as things move on, but they're not a slouch by any means. 11 o'clock, Auburn will try to get back on track. They are 0-3 in the SEC. They'll be in Missouri, Columbia, Missouri for that game, 11 o'clock, so the early game. Then at 11:45, South Carolina's at Oklahoma. That's another interesting matchup. Oklahoma fresh off of the loss to Texas, a game where they were only able to score 3 points. In South Carolina, they didn't win, but they walk out of there with a moral victory in Tuscaloosa. They'll be in Norman at 11:45 for that showdown. That is only a 2-point spread. So Oklahoma, a 2-point favorite in that game. Missouri, 6.5-point favorite over Auburn, by the way, in that game. 3:15 in Starkville. It's number 14 Texas A&M against Mississippi State. Mississippi State scored 31 points against Georgia. They'll play one of the teams. I think one of the real surprises in the conference is Texas A&M, 5-1, 3-0 in the conference, and a matchup where the Aggies are a 15-point favorite on the road. The over-under in that game, 55.5. LSU, with the victory over Ole Miss, heads into Arkansas. Fayetteville is going to be a tough place for them. And Vegas kind of feels the same way. That's a 6 o'clock game, and that is a 2.5-point spread. LSU, a slight favorite on the road. The over-under in that game, 57.5. That's one that I'm interested in checking out. Vanderbilt can improve to 5-2 as they take on Ball State in First Bank Stadium in Nashville. This is the game that I think a lot of us are really curious about. And that is number 5 Georgia at number 1 Texas, 6:30 on Saturday. Texas, a 3.5-point favorite at home. The visiting Dogs, who I felt like over the last few years have had a pretty easy schedule. That not the case this year. They've already played in Tuscaloosa. Now they'll play in Austin, Texas against the Texas Longhorns, who are by far the number 1 team in the country. And I don't think there's any question now that Ohio State has lost to Oregon. And then finally, rounding out the SEC slate this Saturday, it's a 6:45 kickoff. Kentucky's at Florida. Kentucky lost to Vandy, lost to South Carolina. They beat Ole Miss. Florida is going to be without their quarterback, Mertz. They've had a tough time scoring. They have one of the toughest schedules, and a coaching staff that's definitely on the hot seat as those two teams will match up, and that'll round out this Saturday slate. It's a pretty good slate of activity in the SEC, and again, we'll be keeping an eye on that, and we'll talk about it next week. But I feel like the Texas-Georgia game is going to tell us a lot about the Aggies, about the Longhorns, the other Texas team. Are they really the best team in the conference? And there's people that feel like by far they're the best in the SEC. You know, Georgia played a great second half against Alabama, came all the way back down by 28 to take the lead. What Georgia team do you expect to see? Is that team that we saw in the first half the real Georgia team, or is it the team that played the second half against Alabama? There's definitely some issues right now with this Kirby Smart club, but at the same time, you know, just like Alabama, they're 5-1 and they're 3-1 in the SEC. So this is a game that if Texas wins, watch out. You know, I think that this really would kind of solidify them as being the best team in the SEC. And when you talk about the mixed power rating of SEC teams, Texas clearly number 1. And I feel like even though Bama's had some struggles, they're number 2 and Georgia's number 3. And I think it's a really close 2 and 3. You know, LSU's kind of in that conversation. You know, Tennessee hasn't been as good as advertised, but Texas A&M in there as well. But Texas right now is seen as the best team in the conference, and I think Georgia can do a lot to change that in a hurry with this matchup coming up on Saturday. All right, guys, again, thank you for hanging out with us. We do this every Monday from noon to 1. It's Monday Quarterback, Jake Coker and me, Mick Gillispie. The two of us will be back together on Saturday, and make sure that you are by the radio and you tune in 9 to 11 for the Bama Tailgate Show. And finally, as I said before, we'll be recording Friday at Coastal from 1 to 4. So if you're in the area, swing by, hang out. We'll have the show on the stage there and get some lunch and maybe an early dinner, and we'll talk some Alabama football. But have a great week and roll Tide, everybody.